This section is really on plant responses, and so what we have to think about is that response is really a feature of all living things. All living things are going to be able to respond to their environment. In order to respond to a stimuli, you have to be able to sense a stimuli. So when we look at plants and we look at the adaptations that they have in order to respond to their environment, we want to kind of start to wrap our head around what stimuli are going to be important to plants. And so we're going to see some really important environmental signals. The main environmental signals that we're going to see are light, water, and temperature. These are our main environmental signals that we will see influence plants. If we think about plants being able to survive, we do also want to be able to think about other interactions that plants have. We are going to see important interactions with animals. We will see that plants and animals have developed a variety of relationships, some of which are mutualistic, some of which are parasitic, some of which are commensalistic. And this big idea that we're starting to look at it from an ecological point of view of how do species interact with each other. If we first start by looking at how do environmental signals influence plants, one of the most important stimuli that a plant will respond to is light. When we talk about a plant, we do need to almost kind of back up to think about how does a plant start. So we know how an animal starts as a zygote. Plants also start as a zygote. All plants sexually reproduce, and we'll talk about plant sexual reproduction tomorrow. Some plants will start as a seed, and so we are going to see that plants need to decide when to grow. Plant growth is not uniform. It will happen at different rates during different times of the year. So we want to look at growth rate compared to time of year. Not every plant is the same. If you look at a snow crocus, it will grow during the winter. If you look at moonflowers, they bloom during the evening or the night. And so we will see different adaptations to help plants survive in different ways, but they are in response to environmental signals, mainly light. And so the drawing that you're doing tonight actually looks at how does a plant know when to bloom its flower. Well, flowers, as some of us talked about in class, are meant to attract pollinators. We need to only make the flower when the pollinators are out. They may or may not be out during the winter. So it's a really interesting idea to look at this relationship between plants and animals. If we look just at how a plant responds to light, knowing that light can be indicative of many...
Mrs. King, Diane King, please come to student services.
Far red light, this is going to go into the idea of the electromagnetic spectrum and the different wavelengths or energies of lights and how they appear as colors. Far red light you can really think of as shade. So that's kind of how we want to think about it. And so it turns out that there are molecules in plants called phytochrome. Chrome, think chromatic or color. Phytochrome is going to be able to identify whether light is red or whether light is far red. And depending on whether it's red light or far red light, we will signal growth or we will inhibit growth. And so an interesting question is, which one do you think inhibits growth? Red light or far red light? Shade is actually going to inhibit growth. This signals to the plant that there are lots of other plants in the area, and this is not a good time for it to grow. A seed has one chance to grow, and so it doesn't want to start growing in an environment that's not conducive. It's better to wait. And so we'll talk about the structure of the seed and how it allows the seed to wait until the timing and environment is right. But what tells the seed that the environment is right is actually this phytochrome. and the presence of red light. So when red light comes in, it changes PR into PFR. And this is a little difficult to process, and you don't have to memorize PR and PFR. You just need to know that red light will cause a change in the molecule, which allows for physiological actions. So think about the idea of cell signaling. Think about the idea of protein receptors and how this receptor can change shapes, and this shape conformational change can activate other things like secondary messengers. And so the key idea is that the shape of the plant, when does it grow, how much does it grow, is influenced by light. And that light is it red light or is it far red light? If we're getting a lot of shade, we turn inactive. If we're getting a lot of red light, we turn active. So we are inactive. Red light makes us inactive, or makes the molecule inactive. Red light activates the molecule. And it's actually named for what it can absorb. So PR can absorb red light, would transfer into PFR. PFR is what absorbs the far red light and will then transfer itself into red light once it has absorbed it. Not the most important point. Most important point is that the shape of the plant is influenced by the light and the type of light specifically. Once it has started this physiological action, we'll see things like seed germination. So shade equals dormancy, meaning the seed will remain dormant. It will not grow. Red light is part of germination. And of course you can do experiments to see what would happen if there was blue light or green light, and why is it that red light is the one that is received, that the receptor recognizes red light. The other thing that this applies to is plant spacing. If you put too many plants in an area, you're going to have competition for resources, and some plants are not going to grow efficiently. Okay? So now we need to move on to talk about plant response to environmental signals to help control their growth patterns. So this is just the growth itself and the shape of the plant. Then plants are actually going to be able to grow in certain patterns. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this. You should know this a little bit. A tropism is growth in response to a stimuli. It is permanent growth, so it's not like taxis or kinesis, which is movement back and forth. Permanent growth, it can be positive or negative, towards or away from. We have phototropism, which is growth towards or away from light. We have a really important hormone called auxin. And this hormone will elongate the cell. So it will loosen the cell wall, it will elongate the cell, and some cells will bend. So when you see the source of light, auxin is going to be released. Extra auxin is released on the side opposite from light. And so the side across from where the light is gets longer and longer, and that's what causes the plant to bend towards the light. Gravitropism is growth in response to gravity. So the shoot will show negative gravitropism, and the root will show positive gravitropism, growth towards the gravity. And so if you actually turn a plant on its side, there are these things called amyloclasts that will accumulate on the side that is down towards the gravity, and that will help the plant bend and grow in that direction. Then we have thigmotropism, which we've kind of hinted at. This is growth in response to touch, but it needs to be constant touch, and it is growth. So it's not a Venus flytrap. This is going to be things like ivy and plants that are vines. And so tendrils, remember, are flexible stems that allow the plant to grow in response to touch. We do see what are called nastic movements. We don't need to spend a lot of time here, but they're able to respond to quick touch and then go back. So nastic movements are the reversible ones that you see. We do really need to emphasize that these can be in really interesting patterns. And so we do actually see circadian rhythms and dormancy in plants. Circadian rhythms, remember, are going to be 24-hour rhythms. Dormancy can be periods. So we'll see that certain plants are active in the spring, and certain plants are active in the fall, and certain plants are active in the winter. And it depends on the genes of that plant and how it's competing in its environment. And so we do need to really be able to think about how would that happen. There has to be a receptor, and then there has to be some sort of growth response. And usually this is an adaptation to help it better survive. So if you look, for example, at morning glories that bloom only in the morning, or moonflowers that bloom only at night, they're not competing as much with other flowers because they're only open for a certain period of time. We do want to talk just a little bit about the idea of plant hormones. Hormones are cellular signals. Animals have them, plants have them, bacteria could even have them. Anything that is a signal is going to be really important for helping the organism respond to the environment. So we have hormones that allow bending. We have hormones that increase the amount of cell division. You don't need to memorize all of the hormones. The ones that I would encourage you to know are auxin, cytokinin, and ethylene. Ethylene is going to be very important for fruit ripening. So when we start to talk about fruit tomorrow in reproduction and how fruit is an adaptation that helps a plant better spread its seed. It's a sweet substance, usually, that covers the seeds. The animal comes and eats it. But we don't want the animal eating the fruit before the seeds are ready, which is why we need to signal to the animal that the fruit is now ready to be eaten. We will see that there are lots of chemicals in a plant. Abscisic acid is actually going to help with leaf drop. So when you look at plants in the fall and they lose their leaves, plants lose their leaves because it's going to get really cold and the water is going to freeze and the plant will rupture the leaf anyway. And so we're going to lose that leaf, but before we do it, we're going to pull back all the nutrients. And then on our own timeline, we lose the leaf. And so it's called abscission when you lose a leaf. And so if a leaf is damaged, perhaps there's a microorganism or perhaps there's physical damage, we're going to see a high amount of abscisic acid because we want to get rid of that leaf. So plants do interact. They are able to respond, especially in a defensive way. They do have some non-specific immune. And so they respond to microorganisms. They also respond to physical damage. And this is going to be one of two ways. One way that we need to add in is this idea of abscission or killing. Go ahead and apoptosis. Use apoptosis to kill that part of the plant and then break it off the plant. Or as you saw in the aloe plant, the killing of all of those cells right there, but not losing them, actually using them as if it were a scab. But remember, because we have meristems and only certain regions of the plant can grow, we can't use mitosis to regrow that part. That part is just lost. We will see chemical toxins. So these are what are called secondary metabolites, which means that I have a molecule that is inactive, that the secondary form will be active. Well, why would we want it to be inactive? We do not want a poison to be damaging our own plant. So we sequester. Sequester is different. Sequester would be like keeping it in a vacuole, or keep it inactive, which means we'll need a conformational change before it works. And as soon as there's a signal that maybe there's physical damage, maybe an herbivore started chewing, it will release those compounds. And those compounds are going to somehow signal either to the plant or to the animal, this is not good. And so smells or toxins are examples of these chemicals. Allelopathy is actually to decrease competition. So some plants will actually release toxins that will inhibit the growth of plants around them. So this is why you actually don't want to plant plants too close, because they won't be able to grow. But some will actually release toxins.